Actually, everyone, this is all about the census. Right now, there are large-scale protests taking place in Georgia, a country in the Caucasus region. The protesters have declared their refusal to accept the results of the recent local elections, claiming that the government and Russia may have rigged the election. Large clashes are occurring. Today, we'll examine this issue. Georgia is now split into two main factions. They are split into pro-Russian and pro-Western groups. Georgian Dream, the ruling party, is pro-Russian, while most opposition parties are pro-Western. In fact, Georgia has been experiencing a certain level of political crisis since 2024. The reason for this is that, starting in 2024, there have been constant allegations of election fraud within Georgia. The government's approval rating is falling, but the ruling party still has a majority, and there are signs of social media manipulation from Russia and elsewhere. As a result, starting in 2024, large-scale protests have been taking place for several months. Irakli Kobakidze, Georgia's unifier, said joining the European Union would be delayed until 2028, which fueled larger protests. Georgia is split between pro-Russian and pro-Western groups. After the European Union accession was delayed, pro-Western supporters protested in the streets. But recently, a local election was held in Georgia on October 4th. There are many opposition parties, and some of them said they wouldn't participate in this local election because there's a high possibility the government will rig the election again. Other parties said they would participate in the election. The issue is that something impossible occurred in this local election. The ruling party got 81.6% of the votes. Other opposition parties received only single-digit percentages. Especially the mayoral election in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, was also held at this time, and the ruling party's candidate, Georgia's Dream, won a landslide victory with 71.6% of the votes. You could say the ruling party just did well, which is why they got so many votes. In the 2021 local elections, the ruling party Georgia's Dream got just 46.7% of the votes. Polls predicted the opposition would win 83 of 150 seats in the 2024 election, but the ruling party won, raising ongoing suspicions of fraud. The United States claims there was fraud in Georgia, accusing the ruling party of vote buying, misusing public funds, and intimidating voters, suggesting election fraud is occurring there. In this protest, pro-Western groups, upset over recent local election results, took to the streets in large numbers. Tens of thousands gathered in central Tbilisi, quickly filling the squares and main roads with crowds. They marched, chanting slogans such as "We want freedom," "No to fraudulent elections," and "Break free from Russian influence." Opposition politicians, civic groups, and many university students and young people led the protests. Many young people with European Union flags led the protests. They chanted Georgia is part of Europe and condemned the government's pro-Russian actions. At first, the protesters continued their demonstration peacefully, but as time went on, the atmosphere began to grow more heated. Some participants held signs urging the president to step down and stop election fraud, then marched toward the presidential residence. During this process, when the police blocked their entry, some of the protesters pushed against the barricades and charged forward, leading to clashes. Some protesters tried to climb the fence to reach the presidential residence, while others resisted by throwing stones or splashing paint at police cars. Tear gas filled the area as police used water cannons to forcefully disperse protesters, causing screams from multiple spots. Downtown Tbilisi looked like a battlefield. Police and protesters clashed in the streets while citizens shared live scenes on social media. The footage showed police with shields firing tear gas at protesters and injured citizens bleeding as they were taken away in ambulances. Citizens angry said the government had turned its guns on them. The Georgian Ministry of Internal Affairs stated that 21 police officers were injured in the protest, with one in critical condition. They reported 6 protesters injured, but local media and human rights groups believe the real number is much higher. A reporter said tear gas was constant and police shot rubber bullets at protesters. Police said their tough response was because the protest seemed likely to become violent, not just a simple gathering. The protest organizers thought the government deliberately caused the clashes. Local media reported that just before the protest escalated, police abruptly fired tear gas and dispersed the crowd. As a result, the scene quickly descended into chaos, and citizens began to resist even more fiercely, claiming that the regime was driving the people into a corner. Simultaneous protests broke out not only in Tbilisi, but also in other major cities such as Batumi and Kutaisi. In some areas, protesters and police faced off in front of public institution buildings, and there were incidents where government vehicles were set on fire. The protesters stressed peaceful demonstrations, saying, "We do not want violence, just justice." Problems arose afterward. The Georgian Ministry of Internal Affairs said the protests escalated into violence, threatening public order, and started arresting organizers. 5 opposition leaders, including ex-council member Irangreli Nadira J. and former prosecutor General Murtaji Jorileva, were arrested for allegedly inciting regime overthrow and organizing violence. The opposition criticized the government, saying it is using the protests as an excuse to suppress political opponents, and that the regime is silencing the people's voices through a reign of terror. The opposition is demanding the release of the arrested figures and the holding of a new election. Leading human rights groups have raised major concerns about the Georgian government's actions. International Amnesty has called for an immediate end to politically motivated prosecutions of opposition figures and restrictions on the media and civil society. Neighboring countries have also strongly criticized Georgia. Irakli Kobakadze, Georgia's prime minister, rejected the criticism, stating the European Union shouldn't interfere in internal affairs. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakadze said recent protests were European Union backed and claimed the attempt to overthrow Georgia's constitutional order had failed. Currently, Georgia is taking a very confrontational stance. Not only has Georgia postponed its bid to join the European Union to 2028, but it is also taking the same actions as Russia to suppress internal dissent. In March of 2024, a law passed in Parliament requires media outlets and NGOs to register as foreign agents if over 20% of their annual income comes from abroad. But this is exactly the same as Russia's foreign agent law. In other words, they've implemented Russia's law as a way to control the media and civic groups. With this law, all activities and financial details must now be reported to the government. If you fail to comply with the law, you can face fines or even imprisonment. In the end, these kinds of laws end up having a sanctioning effect on civic organizations. Georgia keeps passing pro-Russian laws, and its pro-Russian actions will likely speed up. Experts think the situation in Georgia may signal a lasting systemic shift, not just a brief clash. Georgia is now internally divided and externally a geopolitical hotspot. The pro-Russian regime is growing more hardline, with increasingly blatant suppression of media and civil society. The government claims these are measures to maintain order, but in reality, they function as political tools to silence critical voices against the regime. As major broadcasters in Georgia come under government control, the voices of opposition forces are gradually disappearing. Civic groups face restrictions because of foreign funding, and their interactions with foreign media are reportedly monitored. This phenomenon clearly resembles the Russian-style control system. In fact, even though Georgia's constitution explicitly states joining the European Union, the current ruling party is moving in the completely opposite direction. The international community criticizes Georgia for democratic backsliding, but Prime Minister Kobakadze and the ruling party boost internal unity by calling it foreign interference. Georgia now stands at a crossroads. One path leads outward, the other toward an authoritarian system like Russia's. The problem is that it has already become all too clear which path the Georgian government has chosen. European Union relations have cooled, and all economic aid and cooperation programs are being suspended for now. On the other hand, Russia is reaching out to the Georgian government, promising economic support, energy cooperation, and security cooperation. This aligns with the intention to completely draw Georgia out of the embrace of others and into Russia's sphere of influence. However, this shift in direction is causing significant internal resistance. Pro-Western groups are protesting, saying their country is regressing, and many young people strongly oppose a Russian-style controlled society. This generation grew up with the internet and European culture, not Soviet-era memories. To them, the current state of Georgia is a regression to the past itself. On the other hand, in rural areas and among the older generation, there's still a strong tendency to prioritize stability above all else. They think peace with Russia should be prioritized over conflicts with others, which has deeply divided Georgian society. The government's strict crackdown may stop an immediate explosion, but it doesn't address the root issue. On the contrary, the anger is likely to remain dormant and then lead to an even bigger explosion. Many analysts think Georgia may face another major political crisis in the next year or two. If the government keeps controlling media and suppressing citizens, it may stay in power short-term but can't escape international criticism. There are concerns that joining the European Union will ultimately fall through and that the country may face sanctions and diplomatic pressure from all sides. In this situation, Georgia will have no choice but to increase its economic dependence on Russia, and as a result, there is a risk that a significant portion of its sovereignty will fall under Russian influence. A country that fought for independence after the Soviet Union's collapse could ironically end up back under Russia's influence. On the other hand, some experts analyze that the younger generation within Georgia will eventually become the variable that changes this regime. They believe connecting via social media and public opinion lets them apply pressure. Recently in downtown Tbilisi, young activists have been contacting foreign journalists to share updates about Georgia, spreading information across Europe via social media. If this trend continues, short-term repression may increase, but it could eventually lead to regime change. Georgia now faces a fundamental choice between freedom and survival, democracy's stability, or being caught between all sides and Russia. Although it appears the ruling party has won, it's just the calm before the storm. Repressed societies don't last. Georgia may seem to have paused for a moment right now, but inside, the spark of new change is slowly starting to burn. What do you think about the current situation in Georgia? Please let us know in the comments. That's all for this video, thank you.